They sold her for 47 gold marks, less than the price of a good war horse. Liora Ashford, widow of 3 months, stood shivering in a cramped merchant's office while men in expensive coats debated her worth like she was grain futures. The contract changed hands, the Duke's seal pressed into wax. And just like that, she became property of the most feared man on the northern frontier, Kyle Dravenmore, the Iron Duke, the man who'd reportedly killed his last 3 servants for breathing too loudly. If you want to see how a widow survives being sold to the devil himself, stay until the end, and drop a comment with your city name. I want to see how far Liora's story travels. The office smelled like old leather and newer lies. Liora's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd clasp them together in her lap, then move them to her sides, then back to her lap again. Nothing helped. The tremor ran deeper than her fingers. It lived somewhere in her chest, right next to the hollow space where her heart used to be before Thomas died and took everything worth keeping with him. "Sign here," the merchant said. Grimwood, his name was. Fat fingers, thin smile. "And here. Initial here." She stared at the papers spread across his desk. The words blurred together. Transfer of debt obligation, binding contract, immediate effect. Her late husband's signature, Thomas's careful sloping hand, appeared at the bottom of a document dated 2 years ago. A promissory note she'd never seen before, for an amount that made her stomach turn. "I don't understand." Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Thomas never mentioned—" "Doesn't matter what he mentioned." Grimwood tapped the paper with one thick finger. "It's here, in writing, with his seal. The debt transfers to his estate upon death. That's you, Mrs. Ashford. Congratulations on your inheritance." The man across from Grimwood, the Duke's representative, said nothing. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with the kind of face that gave away absolutely nothing. His coat was black wool, well-tailored, with silver buttons that probably cost more than her wedding dress had. He'd been watching her since she arrived, and the attention felt like being studied by something that was deciding whether to eat you or ignore you. "How much time do I have?" Liora asked. "To pay?" Grimwood laughed. It was an ugly sound. "Sweetheart, you don't have time. You're 3 months past due. If it weren't for the Duke's generosity, you'd be in debtor's prison right now, or worse." She knew what worse meant. Everyone knew. Women who couldn't pay their debts had options, but none of them were good. The Duke's man finally spoke. His voice was clipped, precise. Northern accent, but educated. "The contract is simple, Mrs. Ashford. You work off the debt in Duke Dravenmore's household. Room and board provided. Your debt will be reduced by a set amount monthly. Depending on your usefulness, you could be free in 5 years. Perhaps 7. 5 years, she repeated. Or 7. And if I refuse? Then Mr. Grimwood pursues collection through legal channels. Given the amount owed and your complete lack of assets, that process ends with imprisonment. You'll work off the debt anyway, but in considerably worse conditions." He tilted his head slightly. "The Duke's offer is the better option. I suggest you take it." Liora looked down at her hands. They were rough hands, calloused from 3 months of trying to keep Thomas's apothecary shop running after he died. 3 months of mixing tinctures and selling remedies to people who looked at her with pity and paid half what they'd paid Thomas. 3 months of discovering that her gentle, bookish husband had apparently been a liar and a fool who'd signed papers he couldn't honor and left her holding a debt that would drown her. She'd loved him. That was the worst part. She'd actually loved him. "Where?" she asked quietly. "Dravenmore Estate, northern frontier, about 2 weeks' travel from here. I've heard stories. I imagine you have." The Duke's man pulled a pen from his coat and set it on the desk in front of her. "Most of them are exaggerated. And the ones that aren't?" He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Those are the ones you should remember." She picked up the pen. Her hand still shook, but she signed anyway. What choice did she have? Prison would kill her in a year. At least this way she'd see the North before she died. At least this way she'd have a chance, however small, of living long enough to understand why Thomas had destroyed them both. Grimwood snatched the papers the moment her signature dried. "Excellent. Mr. Thorne will handle transport. You'll leave tomorrow at dawn." "Tomorrow?" Liora stood so fast her chair scraped backward. "I have belongings. I need to close the shop. You need to be ready at dawn," Thorne said. He stood as well, moving with the kind of grace that suggested he was more than just a household representative. Bring what you can carry. Everything else stays. That's not fair. No, he agreed. It isn't. Dawn, Mrs. Ashford, don't make me come find you. He left without another word. Grimwood started shuffling papers, already done with her. Liora stood in the middle of the office, her signed future tucked into a rich man's pocket, and tried to remember how to breathe. The carriage that came for her wasn't what she expected. She'd imagined something brutal, a prison wagon maybe, or a cargo cart with iron bars. What arrived was an actual coach, well-made and sturdy, with the Duke's crest on the door, a black wolf on a gray field. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Thorne was already inside. "Get in," he said. She climbed up with her single bag. Everything she owned now fit in one canvas sack, and settled onto the bench across from him. The interior was plain but clean, comfortable even. The seats were padded, the door closed, the carriage lurched forward. "Where's the driver?" she asked. "Up front, where drivers usually are." "I meant, are there guards, other passengers?" "Just us." She glanced out the window. The city was still waking up, early morning light turning the narrow streets gray and gold. She'd lived here her whole life, 26 years in the same 10-block radius. She knew every shopkeeper, every corner, every shortcut. Now she was leaving it all behind. "You're quiet," Thorne observed. "I'm thinking." "About?" "Whether I should jump out while we're still moving slowly enough that it won't kill me." He didn't laugh. "You'd last maybe 3 days on your own. Less if you headed south. They've got a harder line on debt dodgers down there. North is your only option, and you can't walk to the frontier, so you might as well sit back and try to relax." "Relax," she repeated. "I'm being transported like cargo to work for a man they call the Iron Duke. I've heard he killed his last housekeeper for using the wrong kind of soap." "That's not true." "Which part?" "The soap. He doesn't care about soap." Thorne pulled a book from his coat pocket and opened it. "He killed her for stealing. Big difference." Leora's stomach dropped. "You're joking." "No." He turned a page. "But it was justified. She was selling estate information to his rivals. That's treason on the frontier. She got off easy with a quick death." "Easy," Liora whispered. "Could have been torture. Could have been sold to the mining companies. Could have been a lot of things." He glanced up at her. "The Duke doesn't punish randomly, Mrs. Ashford. He punishes purposefully. Follow the rules, do your job, keep your mouth shut, and you'll be fine." "And if I don't?" "Then you won't be." She turned back to the window and watched her city disappear. 2 weeks on the road felt like 2 years. They stopped at coaching inns, but Liora barely remembered them. Everything blurred together: bad food, hard beds, the constant rocking of the carriage. Thorne mostly ignored her. He read his books, wrote letters, occasionally pointed out landmarks like he was a tour guide showing her a countryside she'd never see again. The land changed as they traveled north. The rolling farmland gave way to rocky hills, then dense forests, then something wilder. Fewer towns, fewer people, more space between everything. The sky seemed bigger here, and the cold had teeth. "We're close," Thorne said on the 14th day. Liora peered out the window. Fog hung low over everything, thick and gray. She could barely see 10 feet beyond the carriage. "Close to what? I can't see anything." "Exactly. That's how you know we're entering the Duke's land." "The fog?" "The fog, the cold, the feeling like you're being watched." He closed his book and leaned forward slightly. "Listen carefully, Mrs. Ashford. When we arrive, you'll be taken to the housekeeper. Her name is Mrs. Halwick. Do exactly what she tells you. Don't explore. Don't ask questions. Don't try to see the Duke." "I wasn't planning to." "Good, because he doesn't take well to curiosity. The estate has rules. Learn them fast." He paused. "And whatever you do, don't go into the East Wing after dark." "Why not?" "Because that's where the Duke sleeps, and he values his privacy above almost everything else." Thorne's expression was serious. "People who disturb him at night don't get second chances, understand?" She nodded. The carriage slowed, then stopped. Liora heard voices outside, deep, rough voices speaking in clipped northern accents. Guards, probably. Checking credentials. Then they were moving again, but slower now. The fog pressed against the windows like something alive. "One more thing," Thorne said quietly. The Duke isn't what you expect. He's not cruel for cruelty's sake, but he's hard and he's cold, and he doesn't forgive weakness. If you want to survive here, you'll need to be harder than you've ever been. Can you do that? Liora thought about Thomas, about the shop, about signing away 5 years of her life to pay for a dead man's mistakes. I guess I'll find out, she said. The carriage rolled through massive iron gates. Artsit. Dravenmore Estate looked like something out of a nightmare. The main building was stone and iron, built like a fortress rather than a house. 3 stories tall, with narrow windows that looked like arrow slits, towers at each corner. A heavy oak door reinforced with black metal. Everything about it screamed defense, control, power. The courtyard was empty except for a few servants who materialized from the fog to handle the carriage. They moved efficiently, silently. No one spoke. No one even looked at her. Thorn stepped out first and offered his hand. Liora took it, climbing down onto cobblestones that were slick with moisture. The cold bit through her cloak immediately. This was a different kind of cold than she'd known in the city, sharper, meaner. "This way," Thorn said. He led her through the main door and into a grand entrance hall that was somehow even colder than outside. High ceilings, stone floors, a massive fireplace that wasn't lit, portraits on the walls, stern-faced men and women who all had the same hard eyes. A woman was waiting for them. She was maybe 50, dressed in perfect black and gray, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was lined but handsome, and her posture was so straight it looked painful. "Mrs. Halwick," Thorn said. "This is Mrs. Ashford, the new acquisition." Acquisition. Like she was furniture. Mrs. Halwick looked Liora up and down with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. "Small," she said. "Thin. City bred. Can you read?" "Yes." "Write?" "Yes." "Cook?" "Some. I can. Some isn't good enough. Can you clean?" "Of course I can clean." "We'll see." Mrs. Halwick turned to Thorn. "The Duke?" "In his study. He doesn't want to be disturbed." "He never does." She looked back at Liora. "Come with me. Bring your bag." Thorn left without saying goodbye. Liora followed Mrs. Halwick deeper into the estate, through hallways that all looked the same. Stone walls, minimal decoration, that persistent bone-deep cold. "Rules," Mrs. Halwick said as they walked. "First, you speak when spoken to, not before. Second, you do your assigned tasks and nothing else. No initiative, no creativity. Third, you stay in the servants' areas unless specifically summoned elsewhere. Fourth, you never, under any circumstances, enter the East Wing without permission." "I was told." "Then I'll tell you again. The Duke's private quarters are off limits. If you're found there without cause, you'll be dismissed immediately. And dismissal here means going back to wherever you came from with your debt unpaid. Clear?" "Yes, ma'am." They climbed a narrow staircase to the 3rd floor. The servants' quarters, apparently. Mrs. Halwick opened a door to reveal a small room, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet. A single bed, a narrow wardrobe, a washstand. One window that looked out over the fog-shrouded grounds. "This is yours," Mrs. Halwick said. "Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. You're expected in the kitchen at 5:30 tomorrow morning. Don't be late." "What will I be doing?" "Whatever needs doing. We're understaffed. You'll rotate through tasks until we find where you're least useless." She paused in the doorway. "One more thing. The Duke doesn't like noise. Keep your voice down, your footsteps quiet, your presence minimal. Pretend you're invisible. It's safer that way." "I've heard stories," Liora said carefully. "About the Duke. Are they true?" Mrs. Halwick's expression didn't change. "Some of them. Which ones concern you most?" "The ones about people disappearing." "People don't disappear here, Mrs. Ashford. They leave. Usually because they broke rules or proved themselves untrustworthy. Sometimes because they couldn't handle the isolation." She met Liora's eyes. "Do your work, keep your head down, and you'll be fine. Try to be clever or brave or heroic, and you won't. It's that simple." She left, closing the door behind her. Liora stood in the center of her new room, her cell, really, and tried not to cry. She was stronger than that. She'd survived Thomas's death. She'd survived losing everything. She could survive this. She set her bag on the bed and unpacked her few belongings. 2 dresses, a nightgown, a hairbrush, the small book of pressed flowers she'd kept from her wedding. She placed it on the narrow windowsill and stared out at the fog. Somewhere in this massive, freezing fortress was the Duke. The Iron Duke. Kyle Dravenmore, the man who now owned her labor, her time, her life. She wondered what he looked like, if he was as cold as his estate, if he even knew she existed. The fog pressed against the window like it was trying to get in. Morning came too early. Liora woke to darkness and cold and the sound of a bell ringing somewhere distant. 5 o'clock. She forced herself out of bed, washed her face with water so cold it stung, and dressed in one of her plain work dresses. The kitchen was in the basement, a huge stone room with 3 fireplaces and enough table space to feed an army. 2 other servants were already there, a middle-aged man named Garrick, who handled the grounds, and a young woman, maybe 20 years old, named Anna, who worked as a housemaid. Neither of them spoke to her. Mrs. Hallwick arrived at exactly 5:30 and assigned tasks. Garrick left to check the livestock. Anna went to start fires in the main rooms. Liora was given a bucket, a brush, and instructions to scrub the entrance hall floor. "All of it?" Liora asked, looking at the massive expanse of stone. "All of it," Mrs. Hallwick confirmed. By noon. It was impossible. The hall was huge and the stone was filthy with tracked-in mud and ash, but Liora knelt down and started scrubbing anyway because what else was she going to do? Her knees ached within an hour. Her hands were raw by hour 2. But she kept going, working her way across the floor in steady sections, trying not to think about how much was left or how little progress she was making. She was maybe halfway done when she heard footsteps, not the quiet, efficient steps of servants. These were different, heavier, more purposeful. Boot heels on stone. Liora looked up. A man stood at the top of the main staircase, looking down at her. She knew immediately who he was. You didn't need introductions. Power came off him like heat off a fire. Duke Cale Dravenmore was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that suggested he didn't just sit at a desk all day. His hair was dark, almost black, worn longer than was fashionable. His face was all hard angles, sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Gray eyes, cold and clear and completely unreadable. He was maybe 35, maybe 40. It was hard to tell. He had the kind of face that age would only make harder. He wore all black, fine clothes, well-tailored, but practical. No jewelry except a single ring on his right hand. His expression was neutral, but the weight of his attention was crushing. Liora realized she was staring. She dropped her gaze immediately and went back to scrubbing. The footsteps continued down the stairs. She could track his movement by sound, across the hall, toward the main door. He was leaving. She kept her head down and kept scrubbing and prayed he'd just walk past. He stopped, right next to her, close enough that she could see his boots, black leather, expensive, perfectly maintained. "You're new," he said. His voice was deep with that northern accent that made every word sound clipped and final. "Yes, Your Grace." She didn't look up. "Stand up." She stood clutching the scrub brush like a weapon. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, which she absolutely did not want to do. But he waited. So she looked up. Those gray eyes studied her with the same intensity she'd seen in Thorn, like she was a problem to be solved or a weakness to be identified. "Name," he said. "Liora Ashford, Your Grace." "The debt transfer." "Yes." "Can you read?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Write?" "Yes." "Any other skills?" She hesitated. "I worked in an apothecary shop. I know herbs, basic medicine." Something flickered in his expression, too fast to read. "Useful. Mrs. Hallwick will reassign you. We need someone in the still room." "Yes, Your Grace." He turned to leave, then paused. "Don't call me Your Grace. It's excessive. Sir is sufficient." "Yes, sir." He left without another word. The main door opened and closed, and then there was just silence and the smell of lye soap. Leora's hands were shaking again. She'd just met the Iron Duke, spoken to him, been close enough to see that his eyes weren't just gray, they were storm gray, the color of winter sky before snow. And he hadn't killed her. Hadn't even been particularly cruel. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it was terrifying. Because if the stories were even half true, that kind of restraint meant he was far more dangerous than she'd imagined. The still room was in the back of the estate, accessible through a servant's corridor that twisted like a maze. It was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 15 feet square, but well organized. Shelves lined 3 walls filled with bottles and jars and dried herbs hanging in bundles. A work table dominated the center, scarred from years of use. 2 windows let in gray northern light. It smelled like home. Liora stood in the doorway and breathed in the familiar scents: lavender and rosemary, chamomile and mint, the sharp bite of alcohol for tinctures, the earthy smell of dried roots. For the first time since arriving, something in her chest loosened. "You know your way around this?" Mrs. Halwick asked from behind her. "Yes, ma'am. My late husband ran an apothecary. I helped him. The Duke wants a full inventory by end of week. List everything, check for spoilage, note what needs replacing. Can you handle that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. This will be your primary assignment. You'll still help with other tasks as needed, but the still room is your responsibility now." She paused. "Don't make me regret this." "I won't." Mrs. Halwick left. Liora stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind her. She ran her fingers along the shelves, reading labels. Willow bark. Foxglove, carefully marked as poison. Feverfew. Comfrey. Someone had maintained this place well. The organization was logical, the storage was proper. Whoever had been in charge before knew what they were doing. She found a ledger on the work table and flipped it open. The last entry was dated 3 months ago. No name, just careful handwriting that listed supplies used and restocked. 3 months. Right around when she'd started this journey. Had someone left? Died? Liora pushed the thought away and got to work. Inventory first. Then she'd figure out what was missing, what needed attention, what could be salvaged. For the first time in months, she had a task she actually understood, something she could control. It wasn't freedom, but it was close enough. The days developed a rhythm. Up at 5, quick breakfast in the kitchen, stillroom work until noon. Lunch. More stillroom work or other assigned tasks, helping Anna with cleaning, assisting Garrick with outdoor work when the weather permitted. Dinner at 6. Evening in her room, usually too exhausted to do anything but sleep. The estate was massive, and she was beginning to understand its geography. The main building was the administrative center, the Duke's study, a library, receiving rooms for the rare visitors. The East Wing was his private quarters, strictly off-limits. The West Wing housed the servants and practical spaces like the kitchen and stillroom. Behind the main building were stables, a blacksmith's workshop, storage buildings. Beyond that was just wilderness, forest and rock and fog. She rarely saw the Duke. He kept strange hours, sometimes leaving before dawn, sometimes not returning until well after dark. When she did glimpse him, it was always from a distance. A shadow in the hallway, a figure crossing the courtyard. He never spoke to her again after that first morning, but she felt his presence everywhere. In the way the other servants moved carefully, quietly. In the absolute order of the estate. In the rules that governed everything. Anna was the closest thing she had to a friend, though even that was limited. The girl was friendly enough, but cautious. Like she was afraid too much familiarity would be punished. "How long have you been here?" Liora asked one evening while they were preparing dinner. 2 years. Anna chopped carrots with practiced efficiency. "Since I was 18. Do you like it?" Anna shrugged. "It's better than the alternative. I was supposed to marry a farmer twice my age. This seemed preferable." "So you chose to come here?" "More or less. My family owed money. The Duke offered to clear the debt in exchange for 5 years of service, so here I am." She glanced at Liora. "What about you?" "Debt transfer. My late husband made promises he couldn't keep." "That's rough." Anna dumped the carrots into a pot. "But you're lucky in a way." "Lucky? The Duke could have bought your contract and done a lot worse than put you to work in the still room. He's fair, as far as masters go. Strict, but fair." Liora thought about those cold gray eyes. "Have you ever spoken to him?" "Once. When I first arrived, he asked my name, told me the rules, and sent me on my way." Anna smiled slightly. "Mrs. Halwick says he doesn't see us as people exactly, more like pieces on a game board. As long as we're useful and follow the rules, we're fine. And if we're not useful, then we're replaced. It should have been ominous, but after 3 weeks in the estate, Liora was beginning to understand that the Duke's cold precision was actually manageable. There were clear rules, clear expectations. As long as she met them, she was safe. It was the uncertainty that had terrified her in the city, the not knowing, the wondering when the next disaster would hit. Here, everything was controlled, and control, she was learning, could be its own kind of comfort, even if it came from the coldest man she'd ever met. Pam. The storm hit in her 4th week. Liora woke to wind shrieking like something alive and dying. She rushed to the window and saw nothing but white. Snow and wind and chaos. By breakfast, it was worse. The kitchen staff moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for a long siege. Mrs. Halwick issued orders in her clipped, no-nonsense way. Extra firewood, secure the shutters, check the livestock. How long do these usually last? Liora asked. Days. Sometimes a week. Mrs. Halwick didn't look up from her inventory list. We're prepared. Just stay inside and keep working. The still room was freezing despite the fire Liora built in the small hearth. She wrapped herself in her cloak and kept sorting through supplies, making notes about what needed replacing when the storm cleared. That's when she heard it. A sound from somewhere deeper in the estate. Not quite a shout, but close. Urgent. She set down her pen and listened. There it was again. Voices. Movement. Something was wrong. She shouldn't go investigate. It wasn't her business. She had her assigned space and her assigned tasks, and she wasn't supposed to deviate. But Thomas had taught her one thing that stuck. When something sounds wrong in a house, you check. Because waiting could mean the difference between a small problem and a catastrophe. She left the still room and followed the sound. The voices led her to the east wing. Liora stopped at the entrance to the forbidden corridor, her hand on the cold stone wall. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. Mrs. Halwick's warning echoed in her head. The Duke's private quarters, off limits, no exceptions. But someone was in trouble. She could hear it, the strain in the voices, the urgency. She stepped into the corridor. It was darker here, colder. The few lamps that were lit cast long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Her footsteps echoed despite her attempts to stay quiet. The voices grew louder. One of them was Mrs. Halwick, which was strange because the housekeeper was usually so controlled. Now she sounded rattled. Tried everything. He won't respond. We need to send for a physician. In this storm? Are you insane? That was Garrick. No one's getting through those roads for days. Then what do you suggest? We just let him. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Liora reached an open doorway and looked inside. The room was large, dominated by a massive 4-poster bed. Dark furniture. Heavy curtains drawn against the storm. A fireplace blazing, but somehow the room still felt cold. And in the bed, barely visible under thick blankets, was the Duke. Even from the doorway, she could see he was in bad shape. His face was flushed with fever, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His breathing was ragged, uneven. Mrs. Halwick stood on one side of the bed, Garrick on the other. Anna hovered near the fireplace, looking terrified. How high is the fever? Mrs. Halwick asked. Garrick shook his head. Too high, and it's been climbing for hours. Has he said anything? Nothing coherent. Keeps muttering about the North Pass, the supply lines. Doesn't know where he is. Liora knew that kind of fever. She'd seen it before in the shop. High enough to cause delirium, high enough to be dangerous. High enough to kill if it wasn't controlled. She stepped into the room. All 3 of them turned to stare at her. What are you doing here? Mrs. Halwick's voice was sharp. This area is forbidden. I heard voices. I thought someone was hurt. Liora moved closer to the bed, ignoring the housekeeper's glare. How long has he been like this? That's none of your concern. Get back to... How long? Liora snapped. Mrs. Halwick's eyes widened at the tone, but she answered. Since this morning. He came back from checking the perimeter in the storm, soaked through. By noon he was burning up. It's been getting worse. Liora reached the bedside and placed her hand on the Duke's forehead. Heat radiated off him like a furnace. His skin was dry despite the sweat, a bad sign. The fever was too high, the body struggling to regulate itself. He needs to be cooled down, she said. Now. And we need to get fluids into him. We tried water, he won't drink. Then we make him drink. Liora turned to Anna. I need cold water, clean cloths, and willow bark from the still room. Also feverfew if we have any fresh. Move. Anna glanced at Mrs. Halwick, who hesitated for a long moment before nodding. The girl ran. You have no authority to give orders here, Mrs. Halwick said quietly. No, I don't. But I have experience with fevers, and right now that's worth more than authority. Liora started pulling back the heavy blankets. The Duke was fully dressed, which was making things worse. We need to get these wet clothes off him. Garrick, help me. Absolutely not, Mrs. Halwick said. It's improper. He's dying. Liora met the housekeeper's eyes. Do you want to explain to whoever's in charge after he's gone that we let him burn to death because it was improper to undress him? The silence stretched. Outside, the storm howled. Mrs. Halwick's mouth thinned. Fine, but I'll handle it. Both of you, out. I need to... out. You can supervise from the doorway if you must, but I won't have you touching him like this. It was the best compromise Liora was going to get. She stepped back to the doorway while Mrs. Halwick and Garrick worked to remove the Duke's wet jacket and shirt. His body was lean muscle and old scars, the build of someone who'd spent more time fighting than sitting at a desk. Anna returned with the supplies. Liora took the willow bark and feverfew and started crushing them in a bowl with water, making a quick tincture. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would help. Get those cold cloths on him, she directed. Neck, wrists, forehead. We need to bring the fever down before we can do anything else. Mrs. Halwick followed the instructions with surprising efficiency. The Duke didn't respond to the cold cloths, which was concerning. Delirium was one thing. Complete unresponsiveness was worse. Liora brought the tincture to the bedside. We need to get this into him. He's not conscious. I know. She sat on the edge of the bed and lifted the Duke's head slightly, tilting it back. Small sips. If he chokes, turn him on his side immediately. She pressed the rim of the bowl to his lips and let a tiny amount of liquid trickle into his mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his throat worked, swallowing reflexively. Good. She gave him more, working slowly, patiently. Half the bowl before his head turned away, rejecting it. That's enough for now, she said. We'll try again in an hour. And then what? Garrick asked. Hope he gets better on his own? The willow bark will help with the fever. The feverfew will help his body fight whatever's causing this. Liora set the bowl aside. But the main thing is keeping him cool and hydrated. That's what's going to save him or kill him. Mrs. Halwick crossed her arms. You seem very certain for someone who worked in a shop. My husband taught me. And before that, I learned from my grandmother who was a midwife. I've seen plenty of fevers. She looked at the Duke's flushed face. This one's bad, but it's not hopeless. Not yet. What caused it? Could be anything. The cold, the wet, exposure. Could be something he was already fighting that the storm made worse. She stood. I need to check the still room for other supplies. Garrick, can you bring up more cold water? We'll need to keep changing the cloths. You're giving orders again, Mrs. Halwick observed. Would you rather I didn't? The housekeeper studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. It was a small smile, but real. No, I suppose someone needs to. Go. Get what you need. Anna will stay here and help me. Liora went. The still room felt like a different world, quiet, organized, under her control. She moved through it quickly, gathering what she needed. More willow bark, yarrow for sweating, elderflower in case the fever needed to break faster, honey to make the tinctures more palatable. Her hands worked automatically, muscle memory from years of preparing remedies. But her mind was racing. She was treating the Duke, the Iron Duke, the man who owned her contract, who could dismiss her for entering his quarters without permission, who reportedly killed people for less than what she was doing right now. And she didn't care, because he was dying, and she knew how to help, and everything else was just noise. She loaded everything into a basket and headed back to the east wing. The storm was worse now, wind rattling the shutters like it wanted to tear the building apart. Snow piled against the windows in drifts. They were completely cut off. Whatever happened next, they were on their own. When she returned to the Duke's room, Mrs. Halwick was changing out the cloths. The Duke's fever hadn't broken, But it didn't seem higher either. That was something. New tincture, Liora said, setting down the basket. This one should help him sweat out the fever. It'll be uncomfortable, but necessary. She prepared the mixture while Mrs. Halwick and Anna worked on keeping him cool. Garrick had left to handle the livestock. Even in crisis, the practical work didn't stop. Getting the Duke to swallow the new tincture was harder. He was restless now, turning his head, muttering words that didn't connect. Liora caught fragments, names she didn't recognize, orders being given to people who weren't there. Something about securing the North Pass before winter. He's fighting battles in his sleep, Anna whispered. Delirium, Liora said. The fever's confusing him. He doesn't know where he is. She managed to get most of the tincture down him, though half of it ended up on the pillow. His skin was still burning hot despite the cold cloths. How long does this usually take? Mrs. Halwick asked. Hours? Maybe longer. The fever will spike before it breaks. That's when it's most dangerous. We'll need to watch him constantly. I'll take first watch, the housekeeper said. Anna, you get some rest. We'll rotate. I can stay, Liora offered. No, you've done enough. And if the Duke wakes up to find you in his bedroom, Mrs. Halwick shook her head. Let's not tempt fate more than we already have. Liora wanted to argue, but the woman had a point. She gathered her supplies and headed for the door. Mrs. Ashford. She turned. Mrs. Halwick was looking at her with something that might have been respect. Thank you, the housekeeper said quietly. Liora nodded and left. She tried to sleep but couldn't. Her room felt too small, too quiet after the chaos of the Duke's quarters. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the storm trying to tear the world apart. Every instinct told her she should have been terrified. She'd broken the cardinal rule, entered the forbidden space, touched the Duke without permission, given orders in his own house. Any one of those things could get her dismissed, sent back to face the debt she couldn't pay. But she couldn't bring herself to regret it. He'd been dying. She'd had the skills to help. The choice hadn't really been a choice at all. Around midnight, someone knocked on her door. Anna stood in the hallway, looking exhausted. Mrs. Halwick wants you. The fever's spiking. Liora didn't bother with her cloak. She just ran. The Duke's room was chaos. He was thrashing now, fighting the blankets, fighting invisible enemies. His skin was scorching hot and he was muttering constantly, a stream of orders and warnings and names that meant nothing to anyone there. Help me hold him, Mrs. Halwick said. She was trying to keep fresh cloths on him, but he kept knocking them away. Liora moved to the other side of the bed and grabbed his arm. His muscles were like iron under her hands, and even delirious, he was strong. She pressed down, trying to keep him still. KL, Mrs. Halwick said sharply. KL, stop. You're safe. You're home. He didn't respond. His gray eyes were open but unfocused, seeing something that wasn't there. The pass, he muttered. Have to secure the pass. They're coming. Winter's coming. Not enough supplies. Not enough. We need to cool him down faster, Liora said. The fever's too high. It's going to damage something vital if we don't... She didn't finish the sentence because the Duke suddenly went still, completely still. For one terrible moment, Liora thought he was dead. Then she saw his chest rising and falling, shallow but steady. Is he? Anna whispered. Unconscious, Mrs. Halwick said. The fever finally overwhelmed him. Liora felt for his pulse. It was racing, thready. His skin was still burning. They were running out of time. Ice, she said. Do we have any ice? In this weather, of course. There's packed snow in the cold storage. Get it. Pack it in cloths and bring it here. We need to bring his temperature down now, or we're going to lose him. Anna ran. Mrs. Halwick stayed, helping Liora position the Duke so his airways were clear. His breathing was getting worse, raspy, labored. Come on, Liora muttered. Don't you dare die on me. Don't you dare. Anna returned with a bucket of snow wrapped in cloth. They packed it around his neck, his wrists, under his arms, anywhere major blood vessels ran close to the surface. The Duke didn't react. He was too far gone. Liora checked his pulse again. Still fast, still weak. More tincture, she said. We need to force the fever to break. She prepared another dose, stronger this time, bitter enough to make her own mouth pucker when she tasted it to check the concentration. Then she tilted the Duke's head back and poured it down his throat, praying he'd swallow reflexively. He did. Barely. Then they waited. Minutes crawled by. The storm raged outside. The fire crackled. The Duke lay motionless in the bed, balanced on the edge between life and death. Liora kept her fingers on his pulse, counting beats, watching for any change. "How long?" Mrs. Halwick asked. "I don't know. Could be minutes. Could be hours." "And if the fever doesn't break?" Liora didn't answer. They both knew what that meant. More time passed. Leora's hand was cramping from maintaining pressure on his wrist, but she didn't let go. The pulse was the only way to track what was happening inside him. Then, slowly, she felt it change. The rhythm steadied. The beats came stronger, more regular. "Something's happening," she said. Mrs. Halwick leaned closer. "Good or bad?" "I don't—" Leora stopped as the Duke's skin suddenly broke out in sweat. Real sweat, not the dry heat from before. "There. The fever's breaking." Anna made a small sound of relief. They worked quickly, changing out the wet cloths, adjusting the blankets so he wouldn't get chilled. The Duke's temperature started dropping, slowly at first, then faster. His breathing eased. His face lost some of that dangerous flush. By the time the first gray light of dawn filtered through the shutters, his fever was down to something manageable. Liora slumped back in her chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Her muscles ached. Her eyes burned. She'd been awake for over 24 hours straight. "You should rest," Mrs. Halwick said. She looked tired too, but satisfied. "He's stable now. Anna and I can manage. What if he gets worse again? Then we'll come get you, but I think the worst has passed." The housekeeper managed a small smile. "You saved his life, Mrs. Ashford, whether he knows it or not." Liora looked at the Duke. He was still unconscious, but his sleep looked more natural now. Peaceful, even. She'd saved him. She'd broken every rule, crossed every boundary, and saved the life of the most powerful man on the northern frontier. The question was what he'd do when he woke up and found out. She slept through most of the next day. When she finally dragged herself out of bed, the storm was still raging, but the wind had lost some of its fury. The worst was passing. She went to the still room first, partly because she needed to check supplies, partly because she needed somewhere familiar to steady herself. The space was cold but orderly. She built up the fire and stood in front of it, trying to warm the chill that had settled into her bones. The door opened behind her. She turned, expecting Anna or Mrs. Halwick. It was Garrick. "He's awake," the groundskeeper said. Leora's stomach dropped. "How is he?" "Weak, confused, asking questions." Garrick's expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Halwick told him what happened, that you took charge, that you treated him." "And?" "And he wants to see you." Fear spiked through her. "Now?" "Now." She followed him through the silent hallways, her heart pounding. This was it. The moment where she'd find out if saving his life had earned gratitude or punishment. The Duke's room looked different in daylight, still imposing but less like a sick room. Someone had opened the curtains slightly, letting in gray winter light. The bed had been tidied. The Duke was propped up on pillows, still pale, but definitely conscious. His gray eyes tracked her as she entered. "Leave us," he said to Garrick. The groundskeeper left, closing the door behind him. Liora stood just inside the room, keeping distance between herself and the bed. The Duke studied her in silence, and she forced herself not to look away. "You entered my private quarters without permission," he said finally. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Yes, sir." "You gave orders to my staff." "Yes, sir." "You treated me while I was unconscious and unable to consent." "Yes, sir." Silence. His expression gave away nothing. "Mrs. Halwick tells me I would have died without your intervention," he said. "Probably, sir. The fever was very high." "Why did you help?" The question caught her off guard. "Because you needed help." "That's not an answer. You could have let nature take its course, waited for me to die and taken your chances with whatever came next. Why risk punishment to save me?" Liora met his eyes. "Because I'm a lot of things, sir. But I'm not someone who lets people die when I can help them. Not even people who scare me." Something flickered in his expression. "I scare you." "Yes." "Good. Fear is honest." He shifted slightly against the pillows. and she saw him wince. Still hurting, then, "Come here." She approached the bed slowly. Closer. She moved until she was standing right next to him, close enough to see the dark circles under his eyes, the hollows in his cheeks from the fever. He'd lost weight in just 2 days. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak but deliberate. He turned her hand over, looking at the calluses, the rough skin from scrubbing floors and mixing tinctures. "These are working hands," he said quietly. "Honest hands." "Yes, sir. You saved my life with these hands." He released her and leaned back. "I don't forget debts, Mrs. Ashford. You've earned something from me. Name it." She blinked. "I don't understand." "A favor. A request. Whatever you want within reason. Name it." Her mind raced. She could ask for her freedom, for the debt to be forgiven, for passage back to the city. But looking at him, really looking, she saw something she hadn't expected. He wasn't making this offer out of obligation or politics. He was making it because he genuinely believed he owed her, and somehow that mattered more than any demand she could make. "I don't want anything, sir," she said. "I just want to do my job." His eyes narrowed. "Everyone wants something. Then I want to keep working in the still room. It's the first place I've felt useful since my husband died. That's all I want." He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Done. The still room is yours, full authority over supplies and treatment. You answer to no one but me." He paused. "And one more thing." "Sir?" "The rules about staying out of the East Wing. They're suspended for you. If I'm ill or injured again, you have permission to enter as needed." That was dangerous. That was giving her access no other servant had. That was trust. "Are you sure, sir?" "I'm alive because you broke the rules, Mrs. Ashford. It would be foolish to punish you for that." He closed his eyes, already exhausted. "Now, get out. I need rest." She turned to go. "Mrs. Ashford." She stopped. "Thank you." The words were quiet, almost grudging, but they were genuine. "You're welcome, sir." She left him there and walked back through the estate in a daze. Everything had changed in the span of 2 days. She'd gone from being invisible to being essential, from following rules to being allowed to break them. And the Duke, the cold, untouchable Iron Duke, had thanked her. She made it back to the still room before her knees gave out. She sat down hard on the work stool and stared at her hands. These are working hands, honest hands. He'd seen her. Really seen her. Not as a debt transfer or a servant or a problem to be managed, but as a person who'd made a choice and followed through. For the first time since signing that contract, Liora felt like maybe she hadn't lost everything after all. Maybe she'd actually found something worth keeping. The storm broke 3 days later, leaving the estate buried in snow and silence. Liora stood at the still room window, watching the morning light turn everything white and clean. The world looked reborn, like the fever and chaos had never happened. But inside the estate, nothing felt clean. Something had shifted. She could feel it in the way the other servants looked at her now, in the careful distance Mrs. Halwick maintained, in the weight of knowing she had access to places they didn't. She'd become something other, something separate. The Duke recovered slowly. She saw him occasionally in the hallways, always dressed impeccably despite the lingering weakness in his movements. He never spoke to her during these encounters, just nodded once and continued on. But she felt his attention like a physical thing, assessing, measuring, deciding something she couldn't name. It made her nervous. A week after the fever broke, Mrs. Halwick appeared in the still room doorway with an expression Liora had learned meant trouble. "The Duke wants to see you," the housekeeper said, "in his study, now." Leora's hand stilled over the tincture she'd been mixing. "Did he say why?" "He doesn't explain himself to me, Mrs. Ashford, and he won't appreciate waiting." The study was in the main building, past the library and down a corridor lined with maps. Liora had never been inside. She knocked once and heard his voice, clipped, commanding, tell her to enter. The room was exactly what she'd expected. Dark wood paneling, shelves crammed with books and documents, a massive desk covered in papers and correspondence, windows overlooking the snow-covered grounds, everything organized with military precision. The Duke stood behind his desk, reading something. He didn't look up when she entered. "Close the door," he said. She did, her heart hammering. He finished reading, set the paper aside, and finally looked at her. He was fully recovered now, no trace of the fever except maybe a sharpness in his features that hadn't been there before, like the illness had burned away something soft and left only edges. "Do you know why I bought your contract?" he asked. The question threw her. Because Mr. Grimwood offered it? Grimwood offers me dozens of contracts every year. Debts, obligations, people desperate enough to sign anything. I refuse most of them. He moved around the desk, leaning against it. "I took yours because of your husband." Ice slid down her spine. "Thomas?" "Thomas Ashford, apothecary. Died 3 months ago of pneumonia." The Duke's eyes were unreadable. "He wasn't just a shopkeeper, Mrs. Ashford. He was one of my informants." The world tilted. "That's not possible," she said. He ran a shop. He mixed medicines. He gathered information, the kind of information people share when they're sick and vulnerable and talking to someone they trust. Names, movements, plans. Kyle's expression didn't change. He was good at it, careful. No one suspected. Leora's mind raced back through her marriage. Thomas coming home late. Thomas asking odd questions about customers. Thomas taking trips he claimed were for supplies, but that never quite made sense. She'd thought he was being secretive about the debts, about money problems. But it had been this. Secrets of a different kind. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Because the debt that brought you here, it's fabricated. Grimwood created it on my orders. Thomas owed me nothing financially. But he owed me operationally, years of intelligence work I paid for in protection and discretion. When he died, that debt transferred to you." The room was too small. The air was too thin. "You mean I'm not here to work off money," Liora said slowly. "I'm here because you think I'm, what, an asset, like Thomas?" "No. You're here because having you under my roof was safer than leaving you in the city where people might ask questions about what your husband really did, and because I wanted to see if you knew anything useful." "I don't. I swear I don't. Thomas never told me." "I know. I've been watching you for weeks. You're genuinely ignorant." He said it matter-of-factly, without cruelty. "Which means you're also genuinely innocent. You have no value to me as an intelligence asset." Relief and fury warred in her chest. "Then why not just let me go?" "Because you saved my life, and that creates complications." He moved to the window, looking out at the snow. The light made his profile sharp as cut glass. "There are people who would pay dearly to know the Iron Duke was sick enough to need saving," he continued. "People who would see weakness in that moment, who would use it." He glanced back at her. "You could walk out of here tomorrow and sell that information. Retire on it, probably." "I would never—" "I know." He turned fully to face her. "That's the complication. You're not stupid enough to think I'm a good man, Mrs. Ashford, but you're also not mercenary enough to exploit what you know, which leaves me in the awkward position of owing you my life while simultaneously needing to ensure you never tell anyone about it." The implications hit her like cold water. "You're going to keep me here. I'm going to offer you a choice." He returned to his desk and pulled out a document. Option 1. I void the fabricated debt. You leave. I provide transport back to the city and enough money to restart your life. But you sign an agreement that what happened during the storm never leaves this estate. Break that agreement and I will find you. He set the paper down and pulled out a second one. Option 2. You stay. The debt remains on paper, but in practice you're elevated. Not a servant, a member of the household staff with real authority. You run the still room, you have access to my library, you attend estate meetings as my medical advisor. You learn things, see things, become part of how this place operates. Why would you offer that? Because you're competent, and competent people are rare. Because I need someone who understands medicine and isn't afraid to act in a crisis. And because, he paused, choosing words carefully, because I'm curious what you'll become if given actual opportunity instead of just survival. Liora stared at the two documents. Freedom or opportunity, safety or risk. What happens if I choose option 2 and it doesn't work out, she asked. Then you leave with option 1's terms, but you'll have wasted time you could have spent rebuilding elsewhere. And if I choose option 1, then you leave today and we never see each other again. She should take option 1. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. Go back to the city. Start over. Forget this frozen nightmare ever happened. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the still room, the first place she'd felt useful in months. Maybe it was the challenge in the Duke's eyes, like he was betting she'd run. Maybe it was just exhaustion with being safe, with being small, with being someone things happened to instead of someone who made things happen. "I'll stay," she said. "You're certain?" "No, but I'm deciding anyway." He smiled. It was a small expression, barely there, but it changed his entire face, made him look younger, almost human. "Good," he said. "Then we start tomorrow. Mrs. Halwick will reassign your quarters to something more appropriate. You'll join me for breakfast at 7 to discuss estate medical needs." "Breakfast? With you?" "You're medical advisor now. That means you need to understand how this estate operates. Can't do that from the servants' quarters." He returned to his papers, already dismissing her. "Don't be late." She left in a daze, her whole world rearranged in the span of 10 minutes. The new quarters were twice the size of her old room, and on the second floor instead of the third. Real furniture, a proper bed, a writing desk, a comfortable chair by the fireplace, windows that actually opened, space to breathe. Anna helped her move her meager belongings, chattering nervously the whole time. "This is incredible," the younger woman said, hanging Liora's dresses in the wardrobe. "I've never seen anyone promoted like this, not in 2 years. It's not a promotion, it's just a different arrangement." "Right, a different arrangement where you eat with the Duke and attend his meetings." Anna shook her head. "Mrs. Halwick is furious, by the way, trying not to show it, but she is." "Why would she be furious?" "Because you just jumped every rank in the household in one conversation. Because the Duke trusts you with information he doesn't trust her with. Because—" Anna lowered her voice. "Because the last person who had this much access to him was his wife, and she's been dead 5 years. Liora froze. "He was married? You didn't know? Everyone knows. She died in childbirth. The baby, too. He shut down half the estate afterward, fired most of the staff, stopped seeing visitors." Anna's expression turned sad. "Some people say he's been hollow ever since, that the fever you treated was the most alive he's been in years." That night, Liora couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the Duke's cold precision, his careful control, the way he'd looked at her documents like they were battle plans. A man who'd lost everything and built walls so thick nothing could get through, and she'd just agreed to live inside those walls. Breakfast was uncomfortable. The dining room was formal and frigid. The Duke sat at the head of the table with perfect posture, working through correspondence while eating. Liora sat 3 chairs down, trying to figure out if she was supposed to talk or stay silent. He solved the problem by speaking first. "The fever," he said, not looking up from his letters. "What caused it?" "Exposure, most likely, combined with exhaustion and possibly an existing infection you were ignoring." "I wasn't ignoring anything." "With respect, sir, you were. Your body doesn't get that sick that fast unless something was already wrong." He set down his pen and looked at her. "Meaning?" "Meaning you work too hard, sleep too little, and probably haven't had a proper medical examination in years. You're running yourself into the ground." "I'm running an estate." "You're running yourself to death. There's a difference." Silence. She'd gone too far. She knew at the moment the words left her mouth, but instead of anger, she saw something else in his expression. Amusement, maybe. Or respect. "You're direct," he observed. "You told me you value competence. Competent people tell the truth. Fair enough." He returned to his letters. "I need a full inventory of medical supplies. Winter's hard up here. Injuries, illnesses, problems that can't wait for a physician to travel from the city. I want to know what we have and what we need." "I'm already working on it." "Good. Also, 3 of the workers in the North Timber Camp have developed persistent coughs. Garrick mentioned it yesterday. I need you to prepare treatment and deliver it." "Deliver it? You mean go to the camp? Unless you plan to treat them through messenger birds." "I've never been outside the estate grounds." "Then it's time you learned the territory." He finished his breakfast and stood. "Garrick will take you tomorrow. Dress warm. It's a 4-hour ride." He left before she could protest. The ride to the timber camp was brutal. Garrick provided her with a horse, a sturdy gray mare that was better behaved than Liora deserved, and basic directions. Then they set out into wilderness that made the estate grounds look civilized. Snow everywhere, trees so thick they blocked the sun, cold that bit through every layer of clothing. The silence was oppressive, broken only by hoofbeats and wind. "How often do you make this trip?" Liora asked after an hour of riding. "Weekly. Sometimes more if there's trouble." Garrick's breath came out in white clouds. "The camps are essential. Timber, hunting, border patrol. Can't run the estate without them." "How many camps are there?" "5. This is the smallest, 20 men, mostly seasonal workers." They rode in silence for another hour. Leora's thighs burned from gripping the saddle. Her hands were numb despite her gloves. She was beginning to understand why the Duke valued competence. Nothing about this life was easy. The camp appeared suddenly through the trees, rough cabins, a central fire pit, stacks of cut timber waiting for transport. Men stopped working to watch them approach. The foreman, a grizzled man named Hrothgar, met them with obvious relief. "About time," he said. "3 of my best cutters are down. Can't afford to lose more." "Show me," Liora said, dismounting carefully. The sick men were housed in one of the cabins. All 3 had the same symptoms: deep coughs, fever, exhaustion. Not severe yet, but heading that direction. Liora examined each of them, asked questions, checked their breathing. The diagnosis was straightforward: lung infection, probably from breathing too much cold air while working. Treatable, but it needed attention now. She prepared tinctures from the supplies she'd brought, gave careful instructions on dosing, and left enough medicine for a week. "If they're not better in 3 days, send word to the estate," she told Hrothgar, "and make sure they're resting. No work until the cough clears. Can't afford to have them idle." "You can't afford to have them dead. Your choice." Hrothgar grimaced but nodded. The ride back was quieter, darker too. The sun was setting, turning the snow blue-gray. Liora was exhausted, every muscle aching. "You did well," Garrick said as they neared the estate. "Better than the last medical advisor." "There was someone before me?" "The Duke's wife. She studied medicine, ran the still room, took care of everyone." He was quiet for a moment. "When she died, a lot of things died with her. The Duke included, in some ways." Liora thought about the cold, controlled man who'd offered her options like they were chess moves. "What was she like?" she asked. "Warm, kind, everything he wasn't. They balanced each other." Garrick glanced at her. "You remind me of her sometimes, the way you move through the still room, the way you don't back down from him." "I'm nothing like her." "Maybe not, but you're the first person since her death who he's let close. That means something." They reached the estate gates as full darkness fell. Liora dismounted stiffly, handed off the horse, and walked inside on legs that barely functioned. The Duke was waiting in the entrance hall. "How did it go?" he asked. "Fine. 3 men with lung infections. I left treatment and instructions." She pulled off her gloves. "They'll recover if they follow the protocol." "Good. Next week you'll check the eastern camp. They've had issues with frostbite." "Next week? I can barely walk after today." "Then you'll build endurance." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Mrs. Ashford, thank you for going. I know it wasn't easy." The acknowledgement surprised her. "You're welcome, sir." He disappeared into the shadows of the estate. Liora stood there, cold and exhausted and weirdly satisfied. She'd done something useful today, something real. Maybe staying had been the right choice after all. Winter deepened, and with it, her role. She visited the camps regularly, treating injuries and illnesses. She reorganized the still room completely, cataloging everything, requesting new supplies, training Anna to assist. She attended the Duke's weekly estate meetings, awkward affairs where men twice her age reported to a man who barely spoke, but whose silence carried more weight than anyone's words. And slowly, incrementally, she learned how Dravenmore actually worked. It wasn't just an estate, it was a kingdom unto itself. The Duke controlled everything: timber rights, hunting territories, mining claims. He employed hundreds across the frontier, maintained private roads, ran his own courier system. He was law and judge and final authority for thousands of square miles. And he did it all with cold, meticulous precision. But she was starting to see cracks in that precision, the way his hand sometimes shook slightly when he thought no one was watching. The headaches he tried to hide. The nights he worked until dawn because sleep wouldn't come. He was still recovering, still damaged, and he wouldn't admit it. One evening in late winter, she knocked on his study door after everyone else had gone to bed. "Come in," he called. She found him at his desk, surrounded by papers, a half-empty glass of whiskey at his elbow. He looked tired, genuinely tired in a way he never showed during the day. "It's past midnight," she said. "I'm aware. When did you last sleep? Is there a purpose to this visit, Mrs. Ashford?" She walked to his desk and picked up the whiskey glass. "Yes, I'm confiscating this and you're going to bed." His eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? You heard me. You've been working 18-hour days for 2 weeks straight. You're drinking instead of eating. You look like death. So I'm pulling medical authority and ordering you to sleep." "You can't order me to do anything. Watch me." She set the glass out of reach. "You made me medical advisor. That means I'm responsible for keeping you alive. And right now, you're doing everything possible to make that job impossible." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're overstepping. So dismiss me, send me back to the city. But before you do, answer one question. When did you last have a full night's sleep?" Silence. "That's what I thought." She moved toward the door. "I'm preparing a sleep tincture. You're going to drink it. Then you're going to sleep for at least 8 hours. That's not a suggestion." "Mrs. Ashford." 8 hours, sir. Or I'll tell Mrs. Halwick you're compromising your health, and she'll make your life miserable until you comply. Your choice." She left before he could argue. 20 minutes later, she returned with the tincture, mild sedative mixed with valerian root, enough to ease him into sleep without knocking him unconscious. She found him still at his desk, but the papers were pushed aside. He took the cup without comment and drank it in one swallow. "Tastes like dirt," he muttered. "Most medicine does. That's how you know it works." "That's not how medicine works. It's called the placebo effect. Now go to bed." He stood slowly. For a moment they just looked at each other, her defiant, him evaluating. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said quietly. "I'm neither. I'm just tired of watching you destroy yourself because you don't think anyone's paying attention." Something shifted in his expression, something almost vulnerable. "Someone's paying attention," he said. "Yes, someone is. So stop making my job harder than it needs to be." He left. She heard his footsteps fade down the corridor toward the east wing. She cleaned up the still room and returned to her own quarters, her heart still racing. She'd just ordered the Duke of Dravenmore to bed like he was a stubborn patient. She'd confiscated his whiskey. She'd threatened him with Mrs. Halwick. Tomorrow he might regret keeping her around. But tonight she'd done what needed doing, and somehow she thought he might actually sleep. Things changed after that night. Subtle things. The Duke started leaving his study at reasonable hours. He ate breakfast instead of just drinking coffee. He stopped pretending he didn't need rest. And he talked to her. Not just about estate business or medical concerns. Real conversation. He asked about her life before, about Thomas, about what she wanted for the future. She asked about the frontier, about how he'd built this empire, about the weight of carrying so much responsibility. They never discussed his late wife. That subject remained locked behind walls she couldn't breach. But everything else slowly opened. One evening in early spring, snow finally melting, mud everywhere, she found him in the library. He was reading by firelight, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "I have something for you," he said when she entered. He handed her a document. She scanned it quickly, her breath catching. It was the fabricated debt, marked void in heavy black ink, signed, sealed, witnessed. "You're free," he said simply. "The debt never existed, and now there's no legal record of it. You can leave whenever you want." She stared at the paper. Freedom. Actual freedom. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I don't want you here out of obligation. I want you here because you choose to be. And if I choose to leave, then I'll provide transport and funds, just like I offered before. No strings. No consequences." She looked at him, really looked, at the man who'd been cold and distant and was now offering her something no one had given her in years, actual choice. "What if I choose to stay?" she asked quietly. "Then you stay as my equal, not as an employee or a debt holder or an obligation. As someone He stopped, choosing words carefully. "As someone whose presence I've come to value." Her heart was pounding. This was more than freedom. This was acknowledgement, recognition, Trust. I'll need time to think about it, she said. Take all the time you need. She left the library with the voided contract clutched in her hands and her mind spinning. She could leave. She could go back to the city, rebuild, start over. Or she could stay with a man who was still mostly mystery, in a place that was brutal and beautiful and unlike anything she'd ever known. The choice should have been easy, but nothing about Cale Dravenmore had ever been easy. She spent 3 days agonizing over the decision. On the 4th day, she went looking for him and found Mrs. Hallwick instead. The housekeeper was in the kitchen, directing dinner preparations. She looked up when Liora entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Hallwick, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why does the Duke trust me? Really, it can't just be because I saved his life." The older woman set down her spoon and studied Liora carefully. "You want the truth?" "Please. Because you're the first person in 5 years who's treated him like a human being instead of a title. You argue with him. You challenge him. You force him to take care of himself." Mrs. Hallwick's expression softened slightly. "His wife did the same thing. He needs that. Someone who isn't afraid of him." "I am afraid of him." "But you don't let that fear stop you. That's the difference." She paused. "Are you thinking of leaving?" "I don't know. I have the option now." "Then let me give you advice. If you stay, stay completely. Don't hold back. The Duke doesn't do half measures, and he won't accept them from you either. You're either all in or you're gone." "That's terrifying." "Yes, but also honest, which is more than most people get." Liora returned to her quarters and stared at the voided contract. She thought about Thomas and his secrets, about the debt that wasn't real, about becoming someone's property and then becoming someone's equal, about a cold, controlled man who'd let her see the cracks beneath his armor. The decision crystallized suddenly. Not rational, not safe, but right. She grabbed the contract and went to find the Duke. He was in his study, naturally, working even though it was past dinner time. She walked in without knocking and threw the voided contract into his fireplace. The paper caught immediately, curling and blackening. "What are you doing?" he asked, standing. "Burning bridges. I'm staying. Not because I have to, because I want to. Because this place and you are the first things that have felt real since Thomas died." She turned to face him. "So I'm all in, whatever that means." He stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Then, slowly, he smiled. A real smile this time, the kind that reached his eyes and made him look dangerous in an entirely different way. "All in," he repeated. "You're certain?" Completely terrified and completely certain. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands. His grip was strong, warm, solid. "Then welcome home, Liora Ashford." It was the first time he'd used her first name. She squeezed his hands back, feeling like she'd just jumped off a cliff and discovered she could fly. 3 days later, a courier arrived from the city. Liora was in the still room when Anna burst through the door, white-faced. "It's bad," the girl said. "There's a man here from the capital. He has documents. He's demanding to see you." Ice slid through Liora's veins. "What kind of documents?" "I don't know, but the Duke's furious. He's in the study with the man now." She ran. The study door was closed, but she could hear voices inside. The Duke's cold and cutting, someone else's oily and smooth. She knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. The Duke stood behind his desk, his expression pure ice. Across from him was a man in expensive clothes, Grimwood, the merchant who'd sold her contract, and on the desk between them was a stack of papers. "Mrs. Ashford," Grimwood said, smiling. "How delightful to see you again." "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Delivering some unfortunate news. It seems there was an error in your contract transfer. The debt wasn't actually cleared. In fact," he tapped the papers, "it's increased. With interest and penalties, you now owe substantially more than before." Her stomach dropped. "That's not possible. The debt was voided." "The fabricated debt was voided," the Duke said quietly. His eyes were locked on Grimwood like he was deciding how to kill him. "But this man claims to have found a real debt. One Thomas actually owed. And since the widow inherits all debts," Grimwood spread his hands. "Here we are." Liora looked at the papers. Thomas's signature. dates from before they married, amounts that made her dizzy. "This is fraud," she said. "I assure you it's quite legal. I have witnesses, documentation, everything necessary." Grimwood's smile widened. "Of course I'm willing to negotiate. Perhaps the Duke would be interested in purchasing the debt again. At a new price, naturally." "Naturally," Cale said, his voice deadly soft. "How much?" "Triple the original amount, given the complications." "You're attempting to blackmail me." "I'm simply conducting business. If you're unwilling to pay, Mrs. Ashford can work off the debt elsewhere. I have several interested parties." The threat was clear: pay or lose her. Liora felt everything she'd just chosen crumbling. The freedom, the trust, the future. All of it hanging on whether the Duke would pay a fortune to keep her. And she couldn't ask him to do that. Wouldn't. "I'll go," she said quietly. Both men looked at her. "I'll go with Mr. Grimwood and work off the debt. You don't have to pay anything." "Liora," the Duke started. "No, I won't let you be extorted because of me. I made my choice to stay freely. I'll make this choice freely, too." Grimwood's smile turned triumphant. "Excellent. We'll leave immediately." "You'll leave with nothing." The Duke's voice cut through the room like a blade. He was staring at Grimwood with an expression Liora had never seen. Pure, focused rage. "This debt is fraudulent," Kyle continued. "I can prove it. And when I do, you'll face charges for attempted fraud against a peer of the realm. The penalty is 5 years' labor. In the mines." Grimwood paled. "You have no proof. I have investigators. I have resources. I have time." The Duke leaned forward. "And I have a very good memory for people who try to cheat me. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this estate now. You're going to forget this debt exists, and you're going to pray I don't decide to destroy you anyway, just for wasting my time." "The debt is legal. Then prove it. In court. With my lawyers. With my witnesses. With every resource I have aimed at tearing your life apart." Cale's smile was terrifying. "Your choice, Grimwood. Walk away now or face consequences you can't survive." The silence stretched. Grimwood grabbed his papers with shaking hands. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." The merchant fled. The door slammed behind him. Leora's knees gave out. She grabbed the desk for support, her whole body shaking. "How much of that was real?" she asked. "The investigators? The proof?" "Some of it. Enough." The Duke moved around the desk. "But even if the debt is real, I'm not letting him take you. Not now. Not ever." "Why? It's just money." "It's not about money." He took her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "You chose to stay. You burned the contract. You're mine now, Liora, and I protect what's mine." The possessiveness should have scared her. Instead, it felt like safety, like someone finally standing between her and the chaos. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest, letting him hold her while she shook. "Thank you," she whispered. His arms tightened around her. "Always." But even as he held her, even as she felt safe for the first time in months, a cold voice in her head whispered, "Grimwood will come back. Men like that always do. And next time the Duke might not be able to stop him." Grimwood didn't come back, but his shadow did. 3 weeks after the confrontation, letters started arriving. Anonymous ones, slipped under doors or left in the estate's message box. They all said variations of the same thing. The Duke is harboring a debtor. The Duke is protecting a woman with fraudulent claims. The Duke's judgment is compromised. Someone was building a case. Carefully, methodically, turning Leora's presence into ammunition. She found Kael in his library one evening, surrounded by the letters, his expression carved from stone. "They're escalating," he said without preamble. "Whoever's behind this wants to force my hand publicly, make me choose between you and my reputation." Liora picked up one of the letters. The handwriting was educated, the paper expensive. "This isn't Grimwood. He doesn't have the connections for this." "No, but someone's paying him to create problems." Kael leaned back, rubbing his temples. "There are people who've wanted to undermine me for years, rivals who think the frontier should be divided differently. This is their opening. Then let me go, publicly, make a show of sending me away, and the problem disappears." "No." Kael, I said no. He stood pacing to the window. I don't surrender ground to bullies, Liora. Not in business, not in politics, not in my personal life. They want me to break? Fine. We'll show them what actually breaks. She moved to stand beside him. Outside, spring was finally taking hold, green pushing through the last snow, the world coming back to life. What are you planning? She asked. Shirati. A counteroffensive? They're using the debt as a weapon? We'll eliminate it entirely, prove it fraudulent, expose Grimwood's network, and burn down whoever's funding this campaign. That could take months and create enemies you don't need. I already have the enemies. This just makes them visible. He turned to her. But I need something from you first. I need to know everything about Thomas, every detail, every contact, every oddity you remember. If Grimwood fabricated this debt, there will be inconsistencies. We just need to find them. She thought about her late husband, about the life she thought she knew and the secrets underneath. Thomas kept a journal, she said slowly. Small leather book. He wrote in it every night. I never read it. He said it was just shop records. Where is it now? I don't know. Everything from the shop was sold or seized when I couldn't pay the rent. But if it still exists, she met his eyes. That journal would have dates, transactions, everything. If the debt is fake, the timeline won't match. KL's expression sharpened. Can you get back into the city without being noticed? Probably. I'm not exactly memorable there. Good. Because I need you to find that journal, quietly, before anyone realizes what we're looking for. It was dangerous. If Grimwood or his backers discovered she was investigating, they'd destroy the evidence. Or worse, destroy her. But sitting here doing nothing while someone attacked them through letters and lies? That was worse. I'll need help, she said. Someone who knows the city's underside, where things end up when they're sold or seized. I'll send Thorn with you. He has contacts. The man who brought me here? The same. He's more than he appears. Kale moved to his desk, already drafting instructions. You'll leave tomorrow. Take the early coach, pose as a widow settling final affairs. Thorn will handle the actual searching. And if we find the journal, then we have ammunition, proof of Grimwood's fraud, evidence to trace back to whoever's funding this. He looked up at her. And we burn them all down. The violence in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like vindication, like finally fighting back instead of just surviving. Tomorrow then, she said. He caught her hand as she turned to leave. His grip was warm, solid. Be careful, he said quietly. These people play for keeps, and they'll see you as my weakness. Let them. Weaknesses can be weapons if you know how to use them. His smile was sharp enough to cut. That's why I chose you. The city looked smaller than she remembered. Liora stepped off the coach into familiar streets that now felt foreign. 3 months away had changed her, or maybe it had just revealed how much she'd never belonged here. Thorn met her at a tavern near the market district. He looked the same, expressionless, efficient, dangerous in a way most people wouldn't notice until too late. Status? He asked without greeting. Unknown. The shop's been cleared, but shop records sometimes end up with the landlord. That's where we start. They walked through narrow streets to the building that had housed Thomas's apothecary. The sign was gone, the windows dark. A new tenant was moving in, a tailor, judging by the fabric bolts stacked inside. The landlord lived above his tavern 3 blocks over. Liora remembered him vaguely, a middle-aged man named Corvin who'd been patient about late rent until he suddenly wasn't. Thorn knocked. Corvin answered, his expression souring when he recognized Liora. Mrs. Ashford, come to beg for your things back? No, just to buy them. She pulled out a small purse, Kael's money, enough to be tempting. I'm told seized property sometimes stays in storage. I'm interested in purchasing any records or books from my late husband's shop. Corvin's eyes fixed on the purse. That's it? Just old papers? Sentimental value. He studied her suspiciously, but greed won. Wait here. He disappeared into the back. Thorn leaned against the doorframe, casual but alert. This seems too easy, he murmured. Because it is. Stay ready. Corvin returned with a wooden box. This is everything. Papers, ledgers, personal items. 20 silver. 10. 15. Liora handed over the coins and took the box. It was heavier than expected, packed tight with documents. They made it 2 blocks before the footsteps started following them. Thorne heard them first. He caught Leora's arm, steering her into an alley. "How many?" she whispered. 3. Maybe 4. He pressed the box into her hands. "Keep moving. Straight through to Merchant's Row. I'll handle them." "Thorne, go!" She ran. Behind her, she heard the footsteps quicken, then shouts, the sharp sound of steel on steel. She didn't look back, just clutched the box and ran through alleys she'd known her whole life, taking shortcuts that had been burned into her memory as a child. She burst onto Merchant's Row breathless and terrified. People stared, but no one stopped her. She kept moving, putting distance between herself and whatever fight Thorne was handling alone. The coaching inn was 5 blocks ahead. Safety. Neutral ground. She made it with her lungs burning and the box still intact. Thorne appeared 10 minutes later, blood on his knuckles, but otherwise unhurt. "They didn't want to kill me," he said, accepting the handkerchief she offered. "Just slow us down, see what we were carrying." "Did they see the box?" "Briefly, but they won't know what's inside." He glanced around the coaching inn's common room. "We should leave. Next coach is in an hour. Can you wait that long?" "I'll manage." They sat in a corner booth, the box between them. Leora's hands itched to open it, to search for the journal, but they needed privacy, safety. The hour crawled past. Finally, the coach arrived. They boarded quickly, securing a private compartment. Only then did Liora open the box. Papers spilled out, receipts, correspondence, ledgers. Thomas's careful handwriting everywhere. She sorted through it frantically, looking for the familiar leather binding. "There," Thorne said, pointing. The journal was at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth. She pulled it out with shaking hands. Thomas's journal, the record of his actual life, not the fabrication Grimwood had created. She opened it to the first page. Dates, transactions, notes about supplies. All mundane. But as she flipped through, other entries appeared. Names she didn't recognize, amounts that didn't match the shop's income, references to the Duke's business and frontier intelligence. "He really was an informant," she whispered. "Did you doubt it?" Part of me hoped it was a lie. That Kael had made it up to justify the contract. She kept reading. "But this is all real. Thomas was gathering information, reporting to someone, probably Kael, and getting paid for it. Any mention of the debt Grimwood claims exists?" She scanned entries carefully. Thomas had been meticulous, recording every transaction. If he'd borrowed money, it would be here. But there was nothing. No loans from Grimwood, no promissory notes, no debts at all except the regular business expenses. "It's fabricated," she said. "The debt doesn't exist. Grimwood created false documents." "Can you prove it?" "The journal proves Thomas never borrowed from him. The timeline proves the promissory note was backdated. Look, Thomas was traveling to the northern camps during the dates on Grimwood's paperwork. He couldn't have been in the city signing contracts." Thorne leaned back, satisfied. "That's enough. The Duke can use this to destroy Grimwood's credibility, and once Grimwood breaks, he'll reveal who's paying him." Liora closed the journal, her hands still shaking. They had evidence, proof, a weapon to fight back with, but holding Thomas's secrets felt like holding a stranger's life. This man, the one who'd spied and lied and built elaborate covers, wasn't the husband she'd thought she knew. Maybe she'd never known him at all. Kael was waiting when they arrived back at the estate. He took the journal without comment, disappearing into his study with it. Liora stood in the entrance hall feeling hollowed out and exhausted. Anna appeared with tea and sympathy. "You look terrible. What happened?" "Long story, involving footsteps and fights and discoveries I wish I hadn't made. About your husband, about everything." Liora accepted the tea gratefully. "Is there any way to unknow things, Anna? To go back to believing comfortable lies?" "No, but you can decide what to do with uncomfortable truths." The younger woman squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever you found, it'll make sense eventually." Liora doubted that, but she appreciated the attempt. She was finishing her tea when Kael emerged from the study. His expression was grim satisfaction. "It's perfect," he said. "Every inconsistency we need. Grimwood is finished. What happens now? Now I go to the capital, present the evidence to the Frontier Council, Force a formal investigation into Grimwood's business practices. He paused. And you stay here. Safe. Like hell I do. His eyebrows rose. Excuse me? This is my fight too. My husband's secrets, my fabricated debt, my reputation being destroyed by anonymous letters. I'm not staying behind while you handle it. Liora, the capital is full of people who need to see I exist, that I'm real, not some abstract weapon against you. She stepped closer. They're using me as ammunition because they think I'm weak, hidden, shameful, so we make me visible. We make me undeniable. He stared at her like she'd suggested burning down the estate. You want to walk into the council chambers, he said slowly, into a room full of peers and politicians who will tear you apart for sport. I want to stop being a secret. Stop being something you hide. She held his gaze. You said I'm yours. Prove it. Publicly. The silence stretched. Outside, birds sang. Inside, tension coiled tight enough to snap. If we do this, Kael said finally, there's no going back. The moment I acknowledge you publicly, you become a target. Everything you say, everything you do will be scrutinized and weaponized. Good. Let them scrutinize. Let them see exactly what kind of woman refuses to disappear quietly. His smile was dangerous, proud. Then pack for 3 weeks. We leave in 2 days. And Liora? Yes? Wear something that makes you look like you belong next to a duke, because that's exactly where you'll be standing. The journey to the capital took 6 days. They traveled in the Duke's private coach, significantly more comfortable than the public conveyance that had brought her north. Kael spent most of the time reviewing documents, preparing his case. Liora spent it trying not to panic. She was about to walk into the political heart of the frontier, into rooms where her presence would be dissected, analyzed, judged, where every word would matter. On the 5th night, staying at a coaching inn halfway to the capital, she found Kael on the balcony overlooking the courtyard. Can't sleep? He asked. Too nervous. She joined him at the railing. What if I make things worse? Say the wrong thing, embarrass you, prove everyone right about me being a liability? Then we adapt. Politics is warfare, Liora. And in war, mistakes happen. The question isn't whether you'll be perfect, it's whether you'll keep fighting when things go wrong. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be honest. He turned to face her. You've survived a bad marriage, sudden widowhood, fabricated debts, and being transported to a frozen estate to work for a man with a reputation for cruelty. You saved my life when everyone else panicked. You stood up to merchants and extortionists and me. Why would you think politicians are worse than any of that? Because politicians have power. So do you. You just haven't learned to use it yet. He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. This might help. She opened it. Inside was a ring, silver band, clear stone that caught the moonlight. It's not what it looks like, Kael said quickly. Not an engagement, but if you're going to stand beside me publicly, you need something that signals status. This was my mother's. It marks you as household, not servant, as someone under my protection officially. Liora stared at the ring. It was beautiful in a stark, northern way. No frills, no unnecessary decoration, just solid craftsmanship and clear purpose, like everything else in Kael's world. She slipped it on, perfect fit. How did you know my size? I pay attention. He smiled slightly. Does it feel right? It feels terrifying. Good. That means you understand the weight. He covered her hand with his, the ring between them. Tomorrow we reach the capital. The day after, we go to the council. Are you ready? No. She wasn't ready. She was terrified and out of her depth and absolutely certain this would go wrong in ways she couldn't predict. But she nodded anyway. Ready. The capital was everything the frontier wasn't. Crowded, loud, expensive, buildings stacked on buildings, people everywhere, the smell of too many humans packed too close together. It made Liora's northern estate feel like paradise by comparison. Kael had a residence here, a townhouse in the merchant quarter, maintained by a skeleton staff. They arrived at dusk, and Liora was immediately swept away by a woman named Helena who managed the household. You'll need proper clothes, Helena said, already measuring her with practiced eyes. The Duke said you're attending the council session. That means formal dress, appropriate styling, jewelry that signals status without being ostentatious. I know. That's why we're fixing it. 3 dresses minimum, all commissioned tonight for delivery tomorrow. Hair appointment in the morning, posture lessons this evening. Posture lessons? You carry yourself like someone trying to be invisible. At council, you need to be someone who belongs. Helena's smile was kind but firm. Don't worry, we'll make you ready. The next 24 hours were a blur of fittings and lessons and overwhelming information. Helena drilled her on proper greetings, council protocols, who to acknowledge and who to subtly ignore. The dresses arrived. Beautiful things in deep blues and grays that somehow made her look like she'd been born to wealth instead of marrying into middle-class obscurity. The morning of the council session, Liora stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked powerful, composed, like someone who could stand next to the Iron Duke without fading into his shadow. Kael appeared in the doorway, already dressed for council, formal coat, polished boots, every inch the frontier lord. You look... He stopped, choosing words carefully. Like exactly who you are. And who's that? Someone worth fighting for. Mchachaset. The Frontier Council met in a stone building that had probably been impressive a century ago and was now just old. The chamber was circular, with tiered seating arranged around a central floor where petitioners presented their cases. Liora followed Kael through corridors lined with portraits of previous council members, all men, all stern, all looking like they'd never smiled in their lives. Remember, Kael murmured as they approached the chamber doors, you're not here to defend yourself. You're here to be undeniable. Let them see you exist. Let them see you're not ashamed. And if they attack, then I handle it. Your job is just to stand there and refuse to disappear. The doors opened. The council chamber was already packed. Dozens of men in formal dress representing various frontier territories and interests. They all turned to stare as Kael entered, and kept staring when Liora followed him. The whispers started immediately. She heard fragments. Brought her here. Audacity. Complete scandal. Kael ignored them all. He walked to the petitioner's floor like he owned it, and Liora stayed at his side, channeling every ounce of confidence Helena had drilled into her. They reached the center. Kael turned to face the council. Gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. I've called this session to address false allegations that have been circulated regarding my household affairs. Specifically, claims that I'm harboring a debtor and compromising my judgment. A man in the front tier stood, older, gray-haired, wearing expensive furs. Liora recognized him from the briefing Helena had given her. Lord Ashton, one of Kael's primary rivals. Duke Dravenmore, Ashton said smoothly. We've all heard the allegations. The question is whether you intend to address them or simply dismiss them as beneath your notice. I intend to destroy them, with evidence. Kael pulled out Thomas's journal and the fabricated debt documents. He handed them to the council clerk, who began passing them around. This journal, Kael continued, belonged to Thomas Ashford, late husband of Liora Ashford. He gestured to her, making her presence undeniable. It details his legitimate business transactions over 5 years. Note the dates, the amounts, the careful record-keeping. Then compare those to the promissory note claimed by Merchant Grimwood. The council members studied the documents. Liora watched their expressions shift, skepticism giving way to interest, then concern. The dates don't match, another council member observed. According to this journal, Ashford was traveling during the period when this note was supposedly signed. Exactly, Kael said. The debt is fabricated, created specifically to extort me by threatening Mrs. Ashford with renewed servitude. A serious accusation, Ashton said. But his tone was less confident now. Do you have proof Grimwood created the forgery? I have proof the debt never existed, which means any documentation supporting it is fraudulent by definition. The question is, who paid Grimwood to create it? Silence. Several council members exchanged glances. Furthermore, Kael continued, I submit that the anonymous letters circulated about my household affairs constitute harassment and attempted political manipulation. I'm requesting a formal investigation into both Grimwood's business practices and the source of this campaign against my reputation. Lord Ashton shifted uncomfortably. These are internal frontier matters, hardly worth council attention. unless the council believes fabricated debts and political blackmail are acceptable tactics, in which case I'd like that position stated formally. For the record, more silence. No one wanted to defend fraud publicly. The council chairman, an ancient man named Corwell, cleared his throat. The council will review the evidence. If it supports Duke Dravenmore's claims, we'll authorize investigation. Is there anything else? Yes. Kale turned slightly, bringing Liora fully into focus. I want it formally noted that Liora Ashford is a member of my household staff. She serves as medical advisor with full authority over estate health matters. Any future claims regarding her status or legitimacy can be addressed to me directly, publicly. It was a declaration, a line in the sand. He was claiming her, protecting her, making her undeniable. The whisper started again, but this time Liora heard uncertainty in them. Calculation. She'd stopped being a secret. She'd become a fact. Lord Ashton stood again. Duke Dravenmore, the council respects your right to manage your household. However, given Mrs. Ashford's unusual position, perhaps it would be appropriate for her to address us directly, so we can assess her character ourselves. It was a trap, a test, forcing her to speak to prove she was worth Kael's protection or reveal herself as a fraud. Kael's hand brushed hers, a warning to be careful. Liora stepped forward. Lord Ashton, she said, her voice steady. You want to assess my character? Here it is. I'm a widow who discovered her late husband had secrets. I'm a woman who was sold like property to pay fabricated debts. I'm someone who learned to survive in places that would have broken weaker people. And I'm the person who saved Duke Dravenmore's life when everyone else panicked and failed. She met Ashton's eyes. So yes, my position is unusual, but I earned it through competence, not manipulation. If that's not good enough for this council, then frankly, this council's standards are lower than I thought. The silence was absolute. Then someone laughed, a sharp, surprised bark of amusement from the back tier. She's got spine, the laughing council member said. I'll give her that. Lord Ashton's expression darkened, but he sat down. Chairman Corwell banged his gavel. The council will review Duke Dravenmore's evidence and render a decision within 1 week. This session is adjourned. Kael's hand found hers as they left the chamber. He didn't speak until they were outside, away from listening ears. That was reckless, he said. That was necessary. You told a council lord his standards were low. His standards are low. He was trying to humiliate me. I refused. She looked up at him. Did I make things worse? No. He smiled, genuine warmth breaking through the cold facade. You made them better. They expected someone meek, someone they could dismiss. Instead, they got someone who fights back, who stands beside me instead of behind me. Good, because I'm done hiding. They walked through the capital streets as evening fell, the ring on her finger catching lamplight, her hand in his. Behind them, the Frontier Council was realizing that the Iron Duke had found someone just as iron-willed as himself. And in a city built on power and secrets, that was the most dangerous thing of all. The week waiting for the council's decision felt like living inside a held breath. Liora stayed in the capital townhouse while Kael worked his network, meetings with allies, quiet conversations with council members, pressure applied in ways she was learning to recognize but not yet fully understand. She occupied herself with Helena's lessons in capital politics, reading everything she could find about frontier law, and trying not to think about what would happen if the council ruled against them. On the 5th day, a messenger arrived. Not from the council, from Grimwood. Kael opened the letter in his study while Liora watched. His expression darkened with each line. What does it say? She asked. He handed it to her without comment. The letter was brief. Grimwood claimed he had additional evidence, witnesses who would testify that Thomas had indeed borrowed money, that the debt was legitimate, that Kael had fabricated the journal to protect his mistress. And unless Kael withdrew his council petition and paid triple the original debt amount, Grimwood would present this evidence publicly and destroy both their reputations. He's desperate, Liora said. This is a bluff. Probably, but bluffs work if you can't prove them false. Kael took the letter back, his jaw tight. And we can't disprove witnesses we haven't identified. If he's found people willing to lie under oath, Then we find the truth before he presents them. In 2 days, Liora, we don't have time. We have Thorn. We have your network. We have the fact that lies always have cracks if you press hard enough. She stood, already moving toward the door. Where would Grimwood find fake witnesses? Who would he trust to lie convincingly? Kale studied her for a moment, then something shifted in his expression, respect mixed with calculation. The docks, he said. That's where he operates, where he recruits people desperate enough to do anything for coin. He grabbed his coat. If he's buying testimony, he's doing it there. They went together, with Thorn materializing from wherever he'd been lurking. The docks at dusk were exactly what Liora expected. Rough, dangerous, full of people who'd vanished the moment authority appeared. But Kyle didn't move like authority. He moved like someone who belonged here, who understood this world's rules. And people responded to that. Information traded for coin. Names whispered in exchange for protection. The web of Grimwood's operation slowly becoming visible. By midnight, they had 3 names. Men Grimwood had approached, offering money for testimony. 1 had refused, 2 had taken the deal. Thorn found the one who'd refused in a tavern near the fish market. The man, weathered, maybe 40, with the cautious eyes of someone who'd survived by knowing when to talk and when to disappear, looked up as they approached his table. You're Dravenmore, he said flatly. I am. Grimwood said you'd come looking, said to tell you nothing. And yet you're still sitting here instead of running, which means you want to talk. The man, he'd given his name as Marsh, took a long drink. Grimwood wanted me to say I witnessed Thomas Ashford signing a promissory note. 3 years back, at a gaming house on River Street. Said he'd pay me 50 silver for the testimony. Why did you refuse? Liora asked. Marsh looked at her. Really looked. Because I knew Thomas Ashford. Not well, but enough. He came down to the docks sometimes, asking questions, buying information. He worked for someone. Probably you. He nodded to Kyle. And he was careful, methodical, not the type to gamble or sign stupid contracts. You know this doesn't help us unless you're willing to testify, Kale said, publicly, against Grimwood. And end up floating in the river? No thanks. What if I guaranteed protection, permanent position in my household, transport north where Grimwood can't reach you? Marsh's eyes narrowed. Why would you do that for a dock rat like me? Because you're telling the truth, and truth is worth protecting. Kale pulled out a purse, set it on the table. 100 silver now, regular wages after. All you have to do is tell the council exactly what you told us. The silence stretched. Outside, ship bells rang in the darkness. Fine, Marsh said finally. But if Grimwood kills me, I'm haunting your frozen estate forever. Fair enough. They found the 2 men who'd taken Grimwood's deal in a boarding house near the textile mills. Thorn handled that negotiation with methods Liora didn't ask about. By dawn, both men had agreed to recant their testimony in exchange for immunity from perjury charges. Grimwood's case was crumbling. They returned to the townhouse as the sun rose, exhausted but grimly satisfied. Kale sent an immediate message to the council chairman detailing the witness tampering, the attempted bribery, the complete fabrication of evidence. Will it be enough? Liora asked, collapsing into a chair in the study. It should be. But with Ashton working against us, nothing's certain. Kale poured 2 glasses of whiskey despite the early hour. We'll know tomorrow. The council's scheduled to announce their decision. And if they rule against us, then we adapt. We fight through different channels. He stopped, looking at her. Why aren't you more worried? Because we've already won. Not officially, not legally, but actually. She accepted the whiskey. Grimwood's network is exposed. His witnesses recanted. Even if the council protects him politically, his business is destroyed. No one will trust him after this. That's not the same as clearing your name. My name was never dirty, just inconvenient. She sipped the whiskey, enjoying the burn. The council can rule however they want. I'm still standing. I'm still here. That's what matters. He moved closer, sitting on the edge of the desk beside her chair. When did you get so ruthless? When I stopped caring what people thought and started caring what I could survive. His hand found hers, thumb tracing the ring she still wore. I should have known that first day. When you scrubbed that floor and didn't flinch when I spoke to you. You were always this strong. I just gave you permission to show it. Is that what you think happened? Isn't it? She considered. Maybe partly, but mostly I got tired of being afraid, tired of letting other people decide my value. She looked up at him. You didn't give me permission, KL. You gave me space. That's different. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't their first kiss. There'd been a few stolen moments over the past weeks, careful and restrained. But this was different. This was certainty, claiming, the acknowledgement that whatever they'd been dancing around had become something real. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. Whatever the council decides tomorrow, he said quietly, you're not leaving, not unless you choose to. Understand? I understand. Good. Because I'm not letting you go, Juan. The council chambers were packed for the announcement. Liora sat in the gallery while Kael stood on the petitioner's floor. She could feel eyes on her, curious, judgmental, calculating. Let them look. She'd stopped caring about their opinions. Chairman Corwell called the session to order. The chamber fell silent. The council has reviewed Duke Dravenmore's evidence regarding the debt claimed by Merchant Grimwood, Corwell announced. We've examined the journal, the promissory note, and heard testimony from multiple witnesses. We've also investigated the allegations of witness tampering and bribery. He paused, looking directly at Kael. The council finds that the debt in question is fabricated. The documentation supporting it contains inconsistencies that cannot be explained except through deliberate fraud. Furthermore, we find evidence of systematic corruption in Merchant Grimwood's operations, including attempted witness bribery and falsification of records. Relief flooded through Liora. They'd won. Officially, legally, publicly. Accordingly, Corwell continued, the council voids all debts claimed by Grimwood against the Ashford estate. Additionally, we're issuing a warrant for Grimwood's arrest on charges of fraud, perjury, and corruption. His business license is revoked. His assets are frozen pending investigation. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. This was more than just clearing Liora's name. This was destroying Grimwood completely. Furthermore, Corwell said, and his tone sharpened, the council has identified Lord Ashton as a financial backer of Grimwood's operations. Specifically, Lord Ashton provided funding for the fabrication of debt documents and the recruitment of false witnesses. The chamber erupted. Ashton stood, his face purple with rage. This is outrageous. I demand— You demand nothing. Corwell's voice cut through the noise. The evidence is conclusive. You attempted to manipulate council proceedings for personal gain. You targeted a fellow peer through fraud and blackmail. Your actions constitute gross misconduct. I was merely conducting business. You were conducting warfare against Duke Dravenmore, against this council's integrity, against the rule of law. Corwell banged his gavel. Lord Ashton, you are hereby stripped of your council seat pending formal investigation. Your territorial rights are suspended, and you will surrender all documentation regarding your relationship with Merchant Grimwood within 48 hours. Ashton's mouth opened and closed like a beached fish. Around him, former allies were already moving away, distancing themselves from his disgrace. Kael stood perfectly still on the petitioner's floor, his expression unreadable. But Liora knew him well enough now to see the satisfaction beneath the control. He'd won. Completely. Publicly. Devastatingly. And he'd done it not just for himself, but for her. Corwell addressed the chamber one final time. This council stands against corruption in all forms. Duke Dravenmore's petition was just. His evidence was sound. And his household affairs are his own concern, not subject to political manipulation. He looked directly at Liora. Mrs. Ashford's position in Duke Dravenmore's household is legitimate and recognized by this council. Let that be the end of it. The gavel fell. Session adjourned. Kael left the floor and climbed to the gallery. He offered Liora his hand, and she took it, standing. They walked out of the council chambers together, her hand in his, the ring visible to everyone who cared to look. Behind them, the whispers started again. But this time, they were different, respectful, wary. The Iron Duke had fought for his medical advisor, had destroyed enemies to protect her, had made her undeniable. That changed things. That changed everything. They left the capital 3 days later. Grimwood had been arrested, trying to flee south. Ashton had been formally charged with corruption. The investigation had spread to reveal a network of fraud that reached deeper than anyone expected. Years of manipulated debts, falsified contracts, ruined lives. Kael had handed over all his evidence and left others to prosecute. He'd gotten what he wanted. Liora's name cleared, his enemies exposed, his household protected. The journey back to the estate felt different than the journey out. Lighter, somehow. Like they'd left weight behind in the capital. "What will you do now?" Liora asked on the third day, watching northern forests appear on the horizon. "Run the estate. Manage the territories. Same as always." Kael glanced at her. "What will you do?" "Keep the stillroom running, visit the camps. Try not to order you around too much. You'll fail at that last one." "Probably." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Kael spoke again, his tone careful. "The council recognized your position, made it official, but that doesn't answer what we are to each other." Leora's heart jumped. "What do you want us to be?" "More than employer and employee. More than lord and advisor." He turned fully to face her. "I want you as my partner, my equal, someone who shares this life instead of just serving in it." "That's not a marriage proposal." "No. Marriage is politics up here. Alliances and contracts and negotiations that take months." He took her hand. "This is simpler. This is me asking if you want to build something together, something that's ours, not defined by councils or contracts or other people's expectations." She thought about the woman who'd been sold like livestock 6 months ago, desperate, terrified, certain she'd never control her own life again. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong enough to challenge a duke, brave enough to face down a council, skilled enough to save lives and destroy frauds and stand her ground against the world. "Yes," she said, "I want that." His smile was rare and genuine and devastating. "Good, because I'm not asking anyone else." Well, spring turned to summer, and with it, the estate transformed. Liora expanded the medical program, training Anna and 2 others in basic treatment so every camp had someone with skills. She established regular health inspections, preventive care protocols, a system that kept people alive instead of just responding to crises. She also began attending Kael's estate meetings as a full participant. The men who reported to him learned quickly that she asked hard questions and accepted no excuses, that her medical authority extended to work conditions, safety protocols, anything that affected the health of his employees. Some of them resented it. Most of them learned to respect it. And Kael supported her completely, publicly, privately, in every way that mattered. Their relationship evolved in ways Liora hadn't expected. They were partners in running the estate, but also companions. He taught her about frontier politics and territorial management. She taught him about medicine and human connection. They argued regularly, sometimes about estate business, sometimes about nothing important, but always as equals. The physical relationship developed slowly, carefully, like they were both aware of the power they held over each other and determined not to abuse it. When they finally came together completely, it was winter again, a year after the fever that had changed everything. Liora had been checking supplies in the still room when Kael appeared in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders. "Problem?" she asked, noting his expression. "No, just wanted to see you." "That's new." "It shouldn't be." He moved into the room, closing the door behind him. "Liora, He stopped, started again. "I'm not good at this, at expressing things that don't involve orders or strategies or control." He moved closer. "But you should know that you've become the most important part of my life, and I don't know what I'd do if you decided to leave." Her breath caught. "I'm not leaving. I know, but I needed to say it anyway. That you matter. That this," he gestured between them, "matters more than anything else." She set down the bottle she'd been holding and moved to him. "Kael Dravenmore, are you trying to tell me you love me?" "I'm terrible at it, apparently." "You really are. Let me help." She took his face in her hands. "I love you, despite the cold and the control and the fact that you still work too hard. I love the man underneath the Iron Duke facade, the one who saved me by giving me space to save myself." "I didn't save you." "No, but you made it possible for me to survive until I could." She kissed him. "That's better than saving. That's partnership." He pulled her closer, and for once his control cracked completely. What followed was heat and need and the acknowledgement that they'd both been holding back for too long. Later, wrapped in each other in his private quarters, Liora felt something settle in her chest, Something like peace. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we keep building, keep fighting, keep choosing this every day. His fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. Unless you want something different. Like what? Like marriage. Officially. Make this legal as well as real. She was quiet for a moment. Would that change anything? Legally, yes. You'd have full rights to the estate, protection under my name, formal status that no one could challenge. And emotionally? Nothing. We're already committed. This would just make others recognize it. She considered. Marriage had trapped her once, to a man with secrets who'd left her drowning in consequences. But this was different. This was choice. Partnership. Two people building something together instead of one person controlling another. Ask me again in a year, she said, if we still want this. If nothing's changed, then we'll make it official. A year? A year. To prove we're choosing each other, not just reacting to circumstances. He smiled against her hair. Deal. Achal? The year passed faster than Liora expected. There were challenges, a harsh winter that tested their supply systems, political maneuvering from other frontier lords who resented Kael's influence, the ongoing adjustments of building a partnership in a place built on hierarchy. But they navigated it together, made decisions together, fought and compromised and built something that felt solid in a way nothing else in Liora's life ever had. On the anniversary of the day she'd burned the voided contract, Kael found her in the still room. It's been a year, he said without preamble. It has. Do you still want this? Want us? She looked at him, this man who'd started as her owner and become her partner, who'd given her space to become strong and then stood beside her as an equal. Yes, she said. I still want this. Then marry me, officially. Make this permanent in every way possible. On one condition. His eyebrows rose. What condition? We do it here. Small ceremony, just estate people. No capital politics, no council observers. Just us and the people who actually matter. Done. They married 3 weeks later in the estate's small chapel. Mrs. Halwick stood as witness. Anna cried. Garrick actually smiled. Thorne was there, expressionless as always, but somehow conveying approval. It was nothing like Liora's first wedding. No expensive ceremony, no distant relatives, no pretense of being something they weren't. Just two people making promises they intended to keep, surrounded by people who'd seen them earn this moment. That night, standing on the balcony of their shared quarters, looking out at the northern wilderness that had become home, Liora felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Happiness. Real, solid, earned happiness. What are you thinking? Kael asked, joining her. That I was sold here like livestock, that I thought my life was over, that I was certain I'd never be anything but property again. And now? Now I'm the wife of the most powerful man on the frontier. I run a medical program that serves hundreds. I make decisions that affect entire territories. I'm someone who matters. She turned to him, and it's terrifying and wonderful and nothing like what I imagined. Better or worse? Different, but mine. Actually mine. She took his hand. Thank you for that. For seeing what I could become instead of just what I was. I didn't see anything. You were always this strong. You just needed permission to show it. No, I needed space. You gave me space. He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the northern lights dance across the sky. Natural beauty in a harsh land, like everything else worth having up here. Behind them, the estate hummed with life. Workers preparing for tomorrow. Guards changing shifts. The whole complex machinery of power and survival that Liora had become essential to. She'd been sold to the Iron Duke and become his equal. She'd been property and become a partner. She'd been invisible and become undeniable. And standing there in the frozen north, wrapped in the arms of a man who'd learned to love by learning to let go of control, Liora Dravenmore understood something crucial. Freedom isn't something given. It's something built. One choice, one battle, one refused surrender at a time. She'd built hers from nothing, in the hardest place imaginable, beside the most difficult man she'd ever known. And she wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. The northern lights danced on, painting the sky in colors that had no names. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new tests of the partnership they'd forged. But tonight, they'd won. And that was enough.